The year is 1861. The air, thick with the scent of pine and the distant murmur of troubled debate, held a fragile peace. It was a peace about to be shattered, a land divided by invisible lines, where brothers would soon stand against brothers. Across this vast nation, men from quiet farms, bustling towns, and shadowed alleys began to hear a different kind of call. For some, it was the drumbeat of duty; for others, the fierce conviction of belief. They were the Union soldiers, and their Confederate counterparts, ordinary men pulled into the extraordinary crucible of war. Imagine the life they led, far from the grand pronouncements of generals and politicians. It began with the dawn. Before the sun had even kissed the eastern horizon, the bugle would sound, a sharp, insistent blast that tore through the morning mist. Camp life was a constant rhythm of routine, a way to impose order on chaos. Soldiers, clad in woolen uniforms that were often too heavy for summer and too light for winter, would rouse themselves from rough blankets laid upon straw or simply the damp earth. The Union blue, a sturdy but sometimes drab fabric, and the Confederate gray or butternut, often faded and homespun, were their second skins, a constant reminder of where they belonged and who they fought for. These uniforms, sometimes ill-fitting and always carrying the scent of sweat and wood smoke, were patched and mended countless times, each tear and stain a story of its own. After the morning roll call, when every man was accounted for, came the work. Building fortifications, digging trenches that snaked across the landscape like dark wounds, chopping wood for the cooking fires, and marching. Oh, the marching! Miles and miles, day after day, under a sun that seemed to have no mercy, or through mud that clung to their boots like a second skin. The weight of their equipment was immense. The Springfield rifle, a solid, reliable weapon, or its Confederate counterpart, the Enfield. The bayonet fixed, a gleaming promise of close-quarter struggle. The haversack filled with rations, the cartridge box, the canteen, the knapsack holding all their worldly possessions. Food was a constant concern, a humbler of proud men. Hardtack, a biscuit so dry and tough it was often called tooth dollars, was a staple. Dipped in coffee, if it was available, it became slightly more palatable. Salt pork, sometimes rancid, beans, and occasional meager vegetables made up the rest of their diet. Luxuries were rare: a bit of molasses, a handful of dried fruit, or, if they were lucky, something purchased from a sutler, a camp merchant who often charged exorbitant prices. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of their resolve. But war wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about the sudden, terrifying eruption of violence. Battles were not the clean, orderly affairs depicted in later paintings. They were a maelstrom of smoke, noise, and fear. The roar of cannon fire, the crackle of muskets, the screams of wounded men, the acrid smell of gunpowder, it all coalesced into an experience that tested the very limits of human endurance. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, a living wall of flesh and iron, reloading their weapons with practiced, often frantic movements. The bayonet charge, a desperate surge forward, was a brutal dance of death. Private Thomas Ashton, a young farmer from Ohio, remembered his first taste of battle near Antietam, say with a hushed awe. He'd trained and drilled, read pamphlets and listened to speeches, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer, overwhelming chaos. The air vibrated with sound, a symphony of destruction. Men fell around him like wheat before a scythe, their faces etched with surprise, pain, or a final vacant stare. He remembered the smell of blood, a coppery tang that would forever haunt his dreams. He fought his rifle until his fingers were numb, until his shoulder ached with the recoil, until the powder smoke stung his eyes and throat. It was a primal struggle for survival, a frantic scramble to stay alive amidst the carnage. Across the lines, Sergeant Elijah Vance of Georgia felt a similar dread, say in a low, determined voice. He'd left his wife and 2 young children, his farm a testament to his hard work, to defend what he believed was his homeland. The uniforms were different, The flags were different, but the fear, the raw human fear, was the same. He saw the desperation in the eyes of the boys in blue, just as they saw it in his. He fought not out of hatred, but out of a deep-seated conviction, a loyalty to his state and his people. He remembered the deafening roar of artillery, the ground shaking as if the very earth were splitting open. He watched his comrades fall, their youthful faces contorted in their last moments. Each fallen man was a life cut short, a family left behind, a future extinguished. There were moments of camaraderie that burned brighter than any battle. Soldiers shared their meager rations, mended each other's clothes, and told stories to ward off the loneliness and the fear. They sang songs, often mournful ballads of home, but sometimes spirited tunes that lifted their spirits. They wrote letters, carefully penned words of love and reassurance to those waiting back home, knowing that those letters might be the last they ever sent. These letters, carried by weary couriers, were threads of connection, vital lifelines in a world that seemed determined to sever them. Young Corporal Jedediah Stone, a city boy from Philadelphia, found a peculiar solace in sketching, say with a soft, reflective tone. He'd carry a worn notebook and a stub of charcoal, capturing the faces of his fellow soldiers, the stark beauty of the landscape, the quiet moments of rest between marches and skirmishes. His drawings were not for fame or glory, but for remembrance. He wanted to capture the humanity in the midst of this inhuman conflict, the quiet dignity of men facing unimaginable odds. He drew the weary lines on a veteran's face, the hopeful smile of a recruit, the silent plea in the eyes of a wounded horse. These sketches became his testament, his quiet rebellion against the destruction. Confederate Private Silas Croft from a small plantation in South Carolina found a different kind of solace in prayer, say with a voice filled with quiet faith. He would often find a quiet spot under a sheltering oak, his rifle leaning against his knee, and speak to his Heavenly Father. He prayed for strength, for courage, and for the safety of his family. He believed in the cause, but more than that, he believed in a higher power that would ultimately guide their destiny. He saw God's hand in the quiet moments of peace, in the resilience of the human spirit, and in the enduring hope for a swift and just end to the conflict. The winter months brought their own unique set of miseries. Cold seeped into bones, turning fingers and toes numb. Sickness, often more deadly than any bullet, swept through the camps. Typhoid, dysentery, measles, these diseases claimed more lives than any battle. Soldiers huddled around meager fires, their breath misting in the frigid air, dreaming of spring, of home, of a warm bed and a hot meal. They faced these hardships with a stoicism born of necessity, their shared suffering forging bonds of fellowship that often transcended the divisions of the war itself. The turning point for many came not in a single grand battle, but in the relentless attrition, the endless marches, the gnawing uncertainty. It was the realization that this war was not a fleeting skirmish, but a deep, agonizing struggle that was changing them and the nation irrevocably. The initial fervor sometimes gave way to weariness, a profound exhaustion that settled into their very souls. Yet, even in the depths of despair, a spark of hope often flickered. The thought of home, of loved ones, of a future beyond the battlefield sustained them. Say with a sigh of bittersweet remembrance. There were moments of unexpected beauty, too. A moonlit night over a quiet battlefield, the stars so bright they seemed to hum. The rare sight of wildflowers pushing through the churned earth after a skirmish. The shared laughter over a ridiculous incident, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy that served a vital balm to their weary spirits. These were the moments that they would carry with them, the quiet anchors in the storm of war. As the war dragged on, the faces of the soldiers aged. The youthful idealism of 1861 often gave way to the grim determination of men who had seen too much, endured too much. They had learned the harsh realities of life and death, the fragility of existence, and the enduring strength of the human will. They had marched through hell and emerged, if not unscathed, then certainly transformed. The end, when it finally came, was not a sudden, glorious victory for one side or the other, but a slow, weary surrender. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by an even more profound silence. The uniforms, once symbols of pride and purpose, became tattered remnants of a painful past. Soldiers began to make their way home, some carrying the scars of battle, others the deeper wounds of memory. They returned to farms and towns, to families who had waited and prayed. They tried to resume their lives, but the war had left an indelible mark. They carried the weight of their experiences, the stories of fallen comrades, the echoes of distant cannons. They were men who had stared into the abyss and somehow found their way back. Their lives, though touched by tragedy, were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the capacity for courage, for compassion, and for hope endures. The war was over, but the stories, etched into the hearts and minds of these men, would live on, a quiet,